Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling smaller, and you couldn't quite explain why? No yelling, no insults, no conflict, just something off. Like your energy was quietly taken. That's not overthinking. That's the echo of a game you never agreed to play, but you've been trapped in it for years. Control today doesn't always wear armor. It wears kindness. It wears logic. It wears the mask of what's best for you, and that is why it is so dangerous. You begin to question yourself instead of questioning the pattern. You begin to doubt your emotions. You start to rewrite your truth, to keep the peace, and that's how it begins. This isn't about one manipulative person. It's about a system of invisible strings being pulled around you, in relationships, family, work, even friendships, where you don't feel safe being fully yourself. The modern game is subtle. It doesn't crush your voice. It convinces you to lower it. And here's the worst part. Most people don't even notice the game until the damage is done. You start silencing yourself mid-sentence. You scan their face for micro-reactions. You edit your truth before it leaves your mouth. You rehearse conversations you've already had because something inside you is still trying to fix it. And yet, they seem calm. They seem unaffected. Why? Because you're the only one playing defense. They're playing offense. Quietly, skillfully, strategically. You're trying to survive. They're shaping perception. But this isn't about blaming them. This is about waking up in yourself. Because once you realize what's happening, you begin to see the game board. And more importantly, you learn how to step off of it. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. It is better to be feared than loved, if one cannot be both. Niccolò Machiavelli. But today no one says that out loud. They just disguise the need for control in more acceptable forms. Guilt, subtle disapproval, praise followed by correction, generosity with strings attached. You're not weak for falling into it. You were trained to prioritize connection over truth. But what happens when connection becomes a trap? What happens when the person smiling in front of you is also the one eroding your center? That's when you realize this isn't just psychological. It's existential. Because the longer you stay in this game, the more you forget your shape. You begin to collapse into what others expect. You become a version of yourself that is palatable, but powerless. You weren't broken. You were just rewritten, slowly, quietly, and with your own consent. But here's the moment it all changes. When you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "Why am I allowing this?" This chapter isn't about solutions. It's about recognition. It's about giving you permission to trust the discomfort, to stop gaslighting yourself on their behalf. Because once you name it, you can begin to move through it. When most people hear the word manipulation, they picture dominance, control, yelling, gaslighting, a visible villain. But that's not how it works in real life, not the dangerous kind. The most damaging manipulation doesn't scream, it whispers. It smiles at you while reshaping your world. It hides behind concern, behind, "I just want what's best for you," behind emotional guilt wrapped in soft tones. You'll never spot it if you're only looking for cruelty. You have to look for control dressed as love. This is how it plays out. You express a boundary, they act hurt. You say no, and they subtly withdraw affection. You make a choice, and suddenly they become distant, cold, disappointed. You start second-guessing your own needs. You start apologizing for existing. And you call it maturity. But it's not growth, it's self-erasure. Machiavelli never said a manipulator had to be cruel. He only said they had to be strategic. A wise ruler should appear to be compassionate, faithful, humane, sincere, and religious, but must be able to act otherwise when needed. Machiavelli, the prince. Modern manipulators are not tyrants, they're performers. They present the version of themselves that will win your trust, not necessarily the one that's true. And here's the cruel twist. When you begin to feel uneasy, your empathy kicks in. You start thinking, maybe I'm being too sensitive. Maybe I'm the problem. They don't even need to defend themselves. You start defending them. You become your own warden. Because manipulation doesn't feel like an attack. It feels like an invitation. Just be easier to love. Just don't make everything a problem. If you really cared, you'd understand. These aren't commands. They're psychological edits. They teach you to shapeshift, not for harmony, but for control. And the most dangerous part? It doesn't feel toxic. It feels familiar. Maybe because it mirrors the dynamics you grew up with. Maybe because your nervous system confuses anxiety with love. Or maybe because deep down, you think you need to earn peace by shrinking. Manipulation isn't always about what they say. It's about what you stop saying when they're around. You hesitate. You filter. You fold. Not because they command you, but because your emotional survival has been conditioned to anticipate their reactions. So let's be clear. Manipulation isn't loud. It isn't obvious. It isn't always conscious, but it's still real. And if you've been silently negotiating with yourself just to be good enough for them, you're not weak. You're waking up. This isn't about blame. It's about reclaiming your internal compass. Because if you don't recognize manipulation for what it is, you'll keep calling it love with tension. But love doesn't require you to abandon yourself. Exposing how Machiavellian strategy applies not only to politics, but to emotional dynamics. Introducing his core principles and translating them into psychological manipulation. Niccolò Machiavelli never wrote about relationships. He wrote about kings, rulers, strategy, empire. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The same principles that govern nations often govern relationships, especially when one person wants power over another. Because where there is emotion, there is leverage. Where there is fear, there is control. And Machiavelli, he wasn't moral. He was observant. He didn't say what should be. He wrote about what is, even when it's brutal. Let's start with his most infamous line. It is better to be feared than loved, if one cannot be both. In politics, that's about control. In relationships, it's about compliance. If someone can't get your loyalty through affection, they'll try to get it through fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of conflict, fear of being wrong, fear of losing the connection. And this fear, it doesn't always feel violent. Sometimes it feels like your fault. You say, I don't want to disappoint them. But the truth is, you're afraid of what their disapproval will do to you. Another core Machiavellian idea, the ends justify the means. In the emotional world, this becomes, I did it to protect us. I lied because I didn't want to hurt you. I ignored your need because it was better for you. It's always wrapped in intention. But the impact? Still control. When someone justifies harm by pointing to their good heart, they're not confessing. They're negotiating your silence. Machiavelli taught that appearances matter more than truth. A leader must appear virtuous, even if he isn't. Sound familiar? Many manipulators don't want to be seen as wrong. They want to be seen as right, even if it means distorting reality. They curate a version of themselves to gain favor. They wear empathy like a costume. They weaponize your perception of them as good. That's not just strategy. That's self-preservation through image. He who seeks power must learn to act like a fox and a lion, Machiavelli wrote. The lion uses fear. The fox uses deception. Modern manipulators use both. Fear, you might lose me. Deception, this is love. You're not battling logic. You're battling illusion. So why does this matter? Because when you realize that power plays are happening in your personal life, you stop taking them personally. You stop asking, why would they do this to me? And start realizing, this is how some people get their needs met. They manipulate to avoid vulnerability. They control to avoid chaos. They dominate to avoid insignificance. And sometimes, they're not even aware of it. This is not a license to hate them. It's a wake-up call to stop surrendering your peace. You're not the villain for noticing the game. You're not cruel for withdrawing your consent. You're strategic. You're becoming sovereign. Machiavelli didn't celebrate cruelty. He documented the raw architecture of power, so we could see it without illusions. And that's exactly what you're doing now. You're seeing manipulation not as a tragedy, but as a tactic, and that changes everything. Nobody chooses to be manipulated. But there's a reason we stay in situations that chip away at us. A reason we apologize when we did nothing wrong. A reason we call red flags passion. A reason we feel anxious and call it love. That reason isn't weakness, it's hunger. Manipulation doesn't start with their strategy. It starts with your craving. Somewhere inside you, a wound was never validated. A need was never met. A truth was never honored. And you grew up learning how to chase affection instead of receiving it freely. You were taught, not directly, but emotionally, that you needed to earn connection. So when someone enters your life and mirrors those same patterns, your nervous system doesn't call it danger, it calls it home. That's why even intelligent, strong, self-aware people get trapped in cycles of manipulation. Because it's not a logic problem. It's an emotional imprint. A manipulative person knows, intuitively or strategically, what you long to hear. You're special. Only I understand you. I'll never leave you. And when they say it, it's not just comforting. It's intoxicating. Because they've found your wound. And they've wrapped their words around it like a bandage, without ever planning to heal it. You don't fall in love with them. You fall in love with who you get to be when they approve of you. That approval becomes addictive. Every time you speak your truth and they pull away, you feel a drop in your worth. So you adjust. You shrink. You play a little safer. Until one day you no longer recognize your own voice, because it has been trained to echo someone else's expectations. Jung spoke to this, not in words of romance, but of shadow. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. The people you attract and tolerate aren't accidents. They're often mirrors of your unmet emotional needs. But here's the truth. What you crave most is what makes you most vulnerable. It's not your heart that betrays you. It's your hunger to be seen that makes you blind. And no, the answer isn't to shut down. It's not to become cold or cynical or closed. It's to become aware, to notice when you're not being loved, you're being fed, and to ask, am I being cared for or managed? Is this connection or conditioning? Do I feel seen or shaped? Emotional hunger is not shameful. It's human. But when you let it steer your choices, you become a magnet for those who know how to feed it. Just enough to keep you there, not enough to set you free. So what now? You stop letting your need define your boundaries. You start letting your values define your relationships. And when someone makes you question your worth, you don't fight harder. You leave faster. It doesn't start with shouting. It doesn't start with confrontation. It starts with a pause, a deep, grounded breath, where you no longer rush to explain yourself, no longer twist your truth to make it easier for them to swallow, no longer beg to be understood. That's silence. It's not emptiness. It's self-respect. The greatest threat to a manipulator is not exposure. It's your refusal to play. You don't need to win the argument. You just need to know that your value doesn't live inside their opinion. And once you believe that, they lose access, not to your love, but to your mind. Machiavelli understood that control was easier over people who needed validation. But the moment someone no longer needs to be perceived as good, they become uncontrollable. You become unpredictable, unshakable, and most importantly, unavailable for exploitation. That's what self-respect does. It rebuilds your inner throne, and from there, You don't argue. You don't chase. You don't perform. You simply don't move. They won't fear your words. They'll fear the calm in your eyes when they try to provoke you and fail. Because real power doesn't shout. It doesn't react. It listens. It watches. And then it chooses silence over chaos. But let's be clear, this shift won't be welcomed. When someone is used to manipulating your empathy, they won't celebrate your clarity. They'll test it. They'll say you've changed. They'll say you're being distant. They'll say you've become cold or selfish. But that's not what's happening. What they're really saying is, I can't reach you the way I used to. And that's when you know it's working. Because the true strength of self-respect isn't force. It's withdrawal. You don't need to push them away. You simply don't lean in anymore. You stop explaining your no. You stop performing for closeness. You stop auditioning for peace. This is not revenge. This is not punishment. This is alignment. And alignment will always look like rebellion to those who benefited from your self-betrayal. So what does it feel like? At first, lonely. Then, clear. Then, free. Because for the first time, you are no longer organizing your life around who might be disappointed by your boundaries. You're not better than them. You're just no longer available for their version of love. And that, to someone who fed on your compliance, is terrifying. Self-respect doesn't make you harder to love. It makes it impossible to use you. You don't need a grand goodbye. You don't need to prove a point. You don't even need closure. What you need is distance. Not to punish, not to manipulate, but to protect your clarity. The most powerful move you can make in a game of control is to walk off the board. And here's the thing. They won't believe it at first. They'll think you're bluffing. They'll wait for your return. Because withdrawal isn't something they expect from someone they've trained to react. But this time, you don't. You don't text to check if they're okay. You don't explain your silence. You don't defend your peace. Because silence is not absence. It's a declaration of inner authority. This is what strategic withdrawal looks like. You let the calls go unanswered. You resist the pull of guilt. You notice the bait and leave it untouched. And every time you don't respond, every time you stay grounded, every time you choose not to prove yourself, you reclaim a part of your power that was once handed away. To stop participating in your own exploitation is not cruelty. It's healing. It's the final step that confirms everything you've remembered about who you are. And yes, it might feel strange. You've spent so long believing that love meant effort, that connection meant performance, that peace meant pleasing. But now you understand. True power is not in how loudly you leave, but in how silently you no longer stay. Machiavelli would call it the art of appearing harmless while making irreversible moves. You don't confront the manipulator. You just remove your availability. You go quiet. You vanish from their system of control. And in that silence, you become untouchable. This doesn't make you heartless. It makes you sovereign. You still have compassion. You just no longer allow it to be weaponized against you. Because withdrawal is not about them. It's about you, your nervous system, your mental clarity, your emotional alignment. You're not running away. You're walking back to yourself. Let others spin their stories. Let them invent the reasons why you changed. Let them guess why you disappeared. Your healing no longer requires their understanding. The game ends when you stop playing. And freedom begins when silence speaks louder than survival. Silence has always been misunderstood. They called it passive, they called it cold, they called it weakness. But that's only because they feared what they couldn't control. Because real silence, the kind that comes after truth, is not the absence of voice. It's the presence of self. It's the space where you stop reacting, Stop explaining. Stop proving. You don't need a louder opinion. You need a deeper center. You are no longer a character in someone else's play. You're the author now. And authors don't scream. They write in silence. This kind of silence is not void. It's voltage. It's the field where clarity lives, where peace is protected, where manipulation dies quietly, because it has nothing left to feed on. People will try to break it. They'll push. They'll provoke. They'll accuse you of giving up. But you're not giving up. You're tuning out the noise that used to distort your vision. You've walked through the illusion. You've seen the strings. You've learned the mechanics of control. And now, you're not angry. You're anchored. Silence, after manipulation, is not withdrawal. It's resurrection. You rise from the pattern. You rise from the people who shaped you into silence. And now you claim silence as your own, as strength, as stillness, as sovereignty. This doesn't mean you'll never love again. It doesn't mean you'll never open again. It means next time, you'll choose connection, not chase it. You'll share yourself, not shapeshift. You'll speak only when silence doesn't say it better. Machiavelli taught us strategy. But now, you are the strategist of your own soul. You don't need to manipulate. You don't need to dominate. You only need to stay in alignment. And that alignment, that calm, unwavering silence, it's not just peace, it's power. Because the one who can remain still while others scream, the one who knows themselves when others demand a reaction, the one who walks away without slamming the door, is the one who cannot be controlled again. The silence you hold now is not emptiness. It's the echo of a self who finally came home.